Dear friends, it is my pleasure to extend a warm welcome to all of you. The world is severely off track in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. Almost 600 million people will live in extreme poverty in 2030, more than half of them women. Financing challenges are a key reason for slow progress and regression. Financing gaps are large and growing. Developing countries don't have access to affordable financing at the necessary scale, and policy frameworks and governance arrangements at both national and international levels are yet to be fully aligned with the SDGs. As we move onwards from the Addis Ababa Action Agenda to a new agenda to be discussed next year in June-July in Sevilla, let us recall that the Addis Agenda sets the collective goal of states, and I quote, to end poverty and hunger and to achieve sustainable development in its three dimensions through promoting inclusive economic growth, protecting the environment and promoting social inclusion. It commits to respecting all human rights, including the right to development, and advance fully towards an equitable global economic system in which no country or person is left behind. End of quote. Concerning its implementation, we have seen challenges in the different action areas of the Addis Agenda. So, for example, public spending is a powerful instrument to incentivize and deliver sustainable development, but domestic revenue mobilization has stagnated since 2010 and has been further exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. This hinders the ability to finance the SDGs. Revenue gains have been volatile and have not been sustained in recent years, while authorities have struggled to contain tax avoidance and evasion. Wealth inequality has risen steadily, and in many countries capital income is taxed at a lower rate than income from labor, but tax avoidance and evasion have become more politically salient. In addition, more needs to be done to build gender equality into budgets. Only 1 in 4 countries have a comprehensive gender-responsive budgeting system so far. Now, concerning private business and finance, private business activity, investment and innovation are major drivers of productivity, employment and economic growth. However, private finance and investment are not sufficiently or not systematically aligned with sustainable development and human rights. Profitability and sustainability incentives must be more closely integrated, and the monetary, fiscal and regulatory environment must change to enable sustainable practices. We need to scale up in this regard, since sustainable fund assets were esteemed to make up less than 5% of the global fund market in 2023. Human rights compliance is not a nice to have, it is a legal obligation. Financial services are not sufficiently inclusive. Gender and location continue to affect access to financial services. Access to long-term sustainable finance remains a challenge, especially for small and medium-sized enterprises in developing countries. Now, concerning international development cooperation, one of the sources of financing for development, we observe official development assistance reaching a record high of $223.7 billion in 2023, yet this represents only 0.37% of donor country gross national income, which is well below, of course, well below the UN target of 0.7% and the more ambitious target of 1%. International trade, then, it is an engine for development in our globalized world. However, trade expansion has until now been uneven, with poor and vulnerable countries in Africa, Latin America and the Caribbean remaining largely marginalized. Rising protectionism and threats to the multilateral trading system endanger the role of trade as an engine for development. 70.9% of international trade interventions were carried out by advanced economies, with domestic and export subsidy policies most frequently used. Such interventions are increasingly affecting developing countries. Those developing countries remain much more vulnerable in the global economy. Their participation in international markets has been mainly through unskilled labor and low value-added goods. Between 2019 and 21, 73.9% of the least developed countries 60.5% of small island development states and 81.2% of landlocked developing countries were classified as commodity dependent compared to only 12.5% of developed countries. In addition, the gap of trade financing has increased in recent years, with global annual unmet demands estimated at $2.5 trillion, primarily affecting small and medium-sized enterprises in the developing countries. Now, on the issue of debt and debt sustainability, we know that very high debt levels and debt servicing burdens can severely constrain fiscal policy space and crowd out SDG-related investments. Half of the LDC's other low-income countries are at high risk, or they are already in that distress. The medium debt service burden to LDCs reached 12% of government revenue in 2023, and debt service burdens now consume over a fifth of tax revenue in 25 developing countries. On that background, more than on debt reimbursement, many developing countries default on SDG implementation. Heavy sovereign debt burdens also raise the cost of borrowing for private companies, affecting domestic business activities. Preventing debt crisis requires progress across all action areas of the Addis Ababa Action Agenda: domestic resource mobilization and international tax cooperation, increased grant and concessional financing, and a supportive international economic environment. Countries encumbered by severe debt challenges lack the capacity to grow out of debt, which is why we also need to do more together on capacity building and training programs to strengthen local business environments, including banking and taxation. All the issues touched upon above are symptoms of systemic issues. Developing countries and the poorest people tend to be most deeply affected by global and regional transmission of economic instability, leading to increasing inequality. Global economic governance has not been able to keep pace with ongoing changes, and it pains to adequately tackle the challenges of today's global economy. International financial institutions will need to better take into account the structure and scope of the global economy, both with regards to its governance structures as well as in the way financing decisions are taken and implemented. The voices of developing countries need to be heard in global economic governance, and their participation in the governing bodies of the international financial institutions needs to be increased. Inclusivity is key, and the pace and scale of change should be in line with today's global economy. All of this is compounded by the triple planetary crisis, and in particular by the climate crisis. We need a fundamental rethink of our approach of solidarity if humanity is to weather the oncoming storms together. Technology is one of the biggest drivers of change, presenting both opportunities and risks. Research and development requiring funding and an increasing digital divide will negatively impact the already existing imbalances in the global economy. Although the rapid growth of the financial technology, the fintech industry, has improved financial inclusion, there are still significant gaps in access to credit and services. Some fintech companies are not subject to the same financial sector regulations as other financial institutions and hence pose new risks. Complementary investments in access to technology, financial and digital literacy skills, into infrastructure and regulatory frameworks based on reliable data for fintech are urgently needed. Madam Vice President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the Social Forum embodies the vision of more effective, inclusive and participatory multilateralism, fostering the exchange of diverse views and ideas to address the global challenges for all to enjoy all human rights, including the right to development. The program of work of this two-day session is organized around the action areas of the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. I encourage you all to engage in open and constructive discussion on the challenges we face in financing for development, with the full realization of all human rights for all at its center. I invite you to share your experiences, good practices, stories and lessons learned in finding common ground and effective solutions. Likewise, to work together in a spirit of international solidarity cooperation and partnership to ensure the means of implementation to bring the SDGs back on track. In that regard, SDG 17, Revitalizing a Global Partnership for Sustainable Development, points towards the topic we will discuss the following 2 days, namely to reform the international financial architecture so that all can collaborate fairly and participate meaningfully in furthering development and the realization of human rights. So in that spirit, may the 2024 Social Forum be a vibrant platform for identifying key recommendations to the 4th Financing for Development Conference in Sevilla next year and contribute meaningfully to applying a human rights-based approach. The opportunity to build bridges and to pave ways for inclusive and transformative financing for development renews our hope and resolve for collective action. I thank you for your attention.